I moved into 42 Oakwood Circle on a Tuesday in early October. The movers had finished by 4, leaving me alone with stacked boxes and the hollow echo that comes with an unfurnished house. I'd chosen this neighborhood in Springfield for its mature trees and the promise of quiet. After 17 years on the federal bench, I'd developed a preference for places where nothing much happened. The cul-de-sac was still and peaceful that first evening. I unpacked my kitchen essentials and books first. Priorities reveal character, my father used to say, then sat on the back porch with a glass of scotch, listening to the rustle of leaves and distant traffic. No one came by with welcome baskets or introductions. Perfect. My driveway shared a property line with a house whose lawn had been cut to golf course precision. Solar lights marked each bend in the walkway, and 3 seasonal flags hung from brackets mounted beside the garage. The mailbox stood perfectly straight with reflective house numbers on both sides. Someone took their suburban presence very seriously. Wednesday morning, I just finished my coffee when the doorbell rang. A man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt with an embroidered logo stood on my porch, hands on his hips, a small terrier sitting at attention by his foot. Greg Thompson, Oakwood Estates HOA president. He didn't offer his hand. Your trash bins are still at the curb. I glanced toward the street where my 2 bins sat from yesterday's collection. I'm Thomas Bennett, just moved in yesterday. HOA bylaws state all bins must be removed from street view by 7 p.m. on collection day. His tone suggested I'd committed a capital offense. Next time will be a documented violation. I nodded. I'll move them now. His eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps surprised by my lack of pushback. See that you do, and you'll need to submit exterior paint color applications before making any changes. The previous owners had conditional approval for that shade of tan. I'll keep that in mind. The dog sniffed at my welcome mat, and Greg made no move to pull him back. Instead, he handed me a thick binder labeled Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, Rules and Regulations. Review this by the end of the week. I'll be scheduling an exterior compliance inspection next Tuesday. I took the binder, looking forward to it. He left without another word, the dog trotting behind him without being called. I moved the bins to the side of the house, then added HOA President, potential issue, to the Notes app on my phone. Old habits from the bench. Document everything, react to nothing. By the following Monday, I'd received 2 written notices. The first informed me that my grass exceeded the maximum height of 3 inches in the back corner of the yard. The second cited improper storage of a ladder I'd used to change porch light bulbs and left leaning against the garage for approximately 2 hours. Both notices were signed with Greg's ambitious flourish. I saved the notices in a fresh file folder labeled HOA Correspondence and measured my grass with a ruler. It was precisely 3.2 inches in the cited corner. The next week brought 3 more violations. Unauthorized wind chimes, they had been there when I bought the house, excessive fallen leaves on the front walkway, it was October, and a criticism of my mailbox color as non-conforming, despite being the original fixture. Each time I corrected the issue when legitimate and documented when absurd. I began taking dated photos of my property each morning, evidence collection by habit. The neighborly harassment wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen far worse examples of petty power plays in my courtroom. On my 10th morning in the neighborhood, I established a walking routine, circling the development just after sunrise. The 3rd day of my new ritual, a woman in a purple fleece jacket fell into step beside me at the corner of Maple and Elm. "You're the new owner at 42, she said, more statement than question. "Thomas Bennett," I replied. "Carol Wilson, I'm 4 houses down on the opposite side." She matched my pace easily. "I see you've met our HOA president." "Several times. He's been president for 5 years running, unopposed." Her tone carried a weight beyond the words. "No one else wants the job?" She gave a short laugh. "The Millers questioned some fine points of the holiday decoration policy last year. By February, they were drowning in violation notices. They moved in April. We walked half a block in silence. "That's unfortunate," I finally said. "Just watch yourself with Greg. He doesn't forget when someone crosses him." I nodded. "I appreciate the warning. Have you been to an HOA meeting yet?" "Not yet. There's one next week, Thursday at 7. He holds them on his back deck." "Is there a meeting room in the community?" Carol's pace faltered slightly. "There's supposed to be. We all pay $50 monthly for community amenities, but—" She trailed off, then abruptly switched topics. "Do you golf? There's a decent public course about 3 miles east." I noted the deflection. "Not much of a golfer. How are the HOA finances managed? Is there an annual report?" She checked her watch with exaggerated concern. "I should head back. Need to get ready for work. Nice meeting you, Thomas." Carol turned at the next corner, her stride quickening. I continued my loop, filing away her reaction for future reference. That Thursday evening, voices carried across the neighborhood. I stood at my kitchen window, watching figures gather on Greg's oversized back deck. He stood at one end, gesturing emphatically while others sat in chairs arranged like an audience. His voice rose occasionally above the general murmur. "Absolute, final warning. Will not tolerate continued violations. Mandatory compliance or financial penalties." The neighbors' responses were too quiet to catch, but their body language told the story. Hunched shoulders, nodding heads, no one challenging the man at the front. I took my coffee into my home office and added notes to my growing file. The walls were still bare, moving boxes labeled legal references and court documents stacked in corners. I'd unpacked the essentials first: my desk, filing cabinet, and laptop. The habits of 17 years on the bench didn't disappear with a change of address. The following week brought more violations. My hose was improperly coiled. A delivery package remained on my porch for excessive duration, 4 hours while I was at a doctor's appointment. My front door wreath displayed non-approved seasonal elements, despite being a simple grapevine circle with no decorations. I photographed each notice, corrected each issue, and said nothing. During morning walks, I began greeting other neighbors. Most responded with cautious pleasantness but moved on quickly. Twice more, I encountered Carol, who shared neighborhood history but steered conversations away from anything related to the HOA or its president. 3 weeks into my residence, I observed Greg's nighttime meetings from my upstairs window. The same pattern repeated: him standing, others sitting, heads nodding. Once, someone appeared to ask a question. Greg's response was immediate and forceful enough that the questioner visibly recoiled. No one else spoke up after that. In my office, I reviewed my documented incidents. 17 violations in 23 days, each more trivial than the last. I looked at the photos of neighbors nodding on Greg's deck, the same deck that extended suspiciously far into the wetland area behind the properties. I studied the HOA financial summary I'd requested twice and been told was being updated for distribution. My banker's box of evidence sat open on my desk. Nearly 2 decades of judicial experience had taught me to recognize patterns of intimidation and financial obfuscation. The weight of my federal judge's credentials remained deliberately absent from all my interactions in the neighborhood. My new neighbors saw only a quiet, compliant newcomer who fixed violations promptly and asked few questions. Greg Thompson had no idea who he was dealing with. He saw an easy target, another resident to bully into compliance. He didn't realize I'd spent my career handling cases just like this, only with much higher stakes. I'd presided over corruption trials involving mayors, business executives, and once a state senator. Greg's petty harassment campaign was amateur hour compared to what I'd documented from my bench. I closed the evidence file and placed it in my desk drawer. Patience was the backbone of justice. I would continue collecting evidence, continue appearing compliant, and when the time was right, I would address this situation through proper channels. The system existed for a reason. and I knew better than most how effectively it could work when properly activated. Greg Thompson was about to receive an education in due process and accountability. He just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks into my documentation campaign, I'd collected a drawer full of violation notices from Greg Thompson. Each morning brought new infractions, from the position of my garden hose to the specific angle of my welcome mat. I photographed everything, corrected what was reasonable, and waited. The game had rules, even if Greg made them up as he went along. That patience evaporated on Thursday morning when I opened my front door to find Greg's terrier hunched on my welcome mat, leaving a steaming deposit. Greg stood at the edge of my lawn, coffee mug in hand, watching. When our eyes met, his mouth curled up at one corner. The dog finished and trotted back to its master, mission accomplished. "Your dog just defecated on my welcome mat," I said, my voice flat. Greg sipped his coffee. "Maybe if you kept your lawn at regulation height, he wouldn't get confused about appropriate bathroom spots. Are you planning to clean it up?" "I don't see any dog waste." He gestured with his mug toward my doorstep. "Might want to get your eyes checked, Bennett." I looked down at the fresh evidence contradicting his statement, then back at Greg, who was already turning away. The terrier followed, unleashed and unrestrained, another violation of the bylaws Greg selectively enforced. I cleaned the mat myself, using a garden trowel and double-bagged plastic. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'd been cleaning up Greg's crap since moving in, but this crossed the line between judicial temperament and personal dignity. That night, after finishing a simple dinner of pasta and grilled chicken, I pulled my laptop from its case and began a different kind of research. The Oakwood Estates HOA was registered as a nonprofit corporation with the state of Virginia. Public records revealed things Greg probably hoped no one would check. The HOA hadn't filed required Form 990s with the IRS for 3 consecutive years. Their corporate status showed as delinquent on the state business registry. The last filed annual financial statement showed a reserve fund of $87,000, but no accounting of expenditures since then. I printed the documents and added them to my evidence folder. Then I emailed the county records office requesting copies of all building permits issued for Oakwood Circle in the last 5 years. A clerk I knew responded within the hour, promising to have the information ready the next day. Rain tapped against my office window as I compiled notes. The rhythm reminded me of court reporters typing during testimony, the steady documentation of facts that would eventually reveal the truth. I was no longer merely collecting evidence of harassment. I was building a case. At the county clerk's office the following morning, Diane, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses on a chain, slid a folder across the counter. "Everything you asked for, Judge Bennett," she said, her voice low despite the empty office. "Just Thomas now, Diane. I'm retired. Once a judge, always a judge." She tapped the folder. "Not much activity on your street, permit-wise." I thanked her and took the documents to a corner table. 10 building permits for Oakwood Circle in 5 years, 7 roof replacements, 2 fence installations, 1 sunroom addition. Nothing for 127 Oakwood Circle, Greg's address. Nothing for the expansive deck where he held his HOA meetings, the one that extended well beyond the typical property line into what appeared to be protected wetland. The wooden table creaked as I leaned forward, examining the permit map. Each property was clearly outlined with wetland boundaries marked in blue hatch marks. Greg's deck extended a good 15 feet into the protected area, a clear violation that would interest multiple county departments. I returned to the counter. "Any way to check if there were permit applications that weren't approved?" Diane typed, her fingers clicking rapidly across the keyboard. "Nothing for that address, not even an inquiry." "What about wetland encroachment permits?" "Those go through County Environmental Services, but—" She typed again, the screen's blue glow reflecting in her glasses. "No applications on file for that property or street. Want me to check with Environmental directly?" "No need. I'll follow up myself." I slid the folder back. Could I get copies of these? Already made them. She handed me a sealed envelope. And, Judge, she hesitated, glancing toward her supervisor's empty office. Robert, over in code enforcement, would be your best contact for wetland violations. His wife Mary Ann works in your old courthouse. I nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Robert might be particularly responsive to concerns raised by a federal judge. Appreciate the suggestion. That afternoon, I spotted Jennifer Harris checking her mailbox next door. Her shoulders tensed as she flipped through what appeared to be bills. We'd exchanged basic pleasantries since my arrival, but nothing substantial. Today, I decided to change that. "Afternoon, Jennifer." She looked up, a stack of mail clutched against her chest. "Hi, Thomas. Getting settled in okay? Despite all the—" She gestured toward my front door, where the latest violation notice had been posted that morning. This one cited excessive bird activity at my feeder. "I'm managing." I paused, weighing my approach. "Actually, I've been researching the HOA structure, trying to understand how things work around here." Something in her expression tightened. "Good luck with that. Greg doesn't exactly operate by the book." "Oh?" She glanced around, then stepped closer. "Last spring, he collected $500 from each house for community improvements. Something about upgrading the entrance signs and planting new trees along the main drive. Did that happen? What do you think?" Her laugh was short, without humor. "When I asked about it at the next meeting, he said there were unexpected expenses, and the project was temporarily delayed. That was 7 months ago. Did you get a receipt for your payment? He said receipts would come with the end-of-year financial statement." Jennifer shifted her weight, mail crinkling against her chest. "There wasn't one." "Cash payment?" She nodded. "He insisted. Easier for record-keeping, he claimed." I kept my expression neutral despite my judicial instincts firing warning signals. "Has anyone requested financial records?" "Michael tried once. He's a retired accountant over on Elm. Greg told him the records were with the HOA attorney for review." She shook her head. "That was 3 months ago. You know, Virginia Code Section 55.1-1815 requires HOAs to make all financial records available to members within 5 business days of a written request." Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem to know a lot about HOA regulations." "I did some reading. It also says they can't require cash payments without providing immediate receipts, and all expenditures over $1,000 require board approval, documented in meeting minutes." "Are you some kind of lawyer?" "Just a concerned homeowner." I offered a small smile. "Someone who believes in following the rules, all of them, not just the convenient ones." Jennifer studied me for a moment, tapping her mail against her thigh. "You know, a few of us have wondered about all this. We just didn't know what to do. You might consider a formal written request for financial records, sent by certified mail. The law's very specific about homeowner rights. And if he ignores it, then he's breaking state law, not just HOA bylaws." Something shifted in her expression, a spark of recognition that she had options. "I should get back to work," she said, but made no move to leave. "Thomas, have others mentioned paying for these supposed improvements?" "Not to me directly. Carol probably has, and the Millers before they left." She hesitated. "That's at least $15,000 if everyone paid." I nodded. "Might be worth asking around." "I might do that." She turned toward her house, then stopped. "Thanks, Thomas, for the information. Just being neighborly." That Saturday, Greg hosted another gathering on his deck. The temperature had dipped into the low 60s, but he'd set up patio heaters, 3 of them, their flames visible from my upstairs window. Neighbors arrived in 2s and 3s, carrying covered dishes and bottles of wine. The same neighbors who nervously avoided eye contact when I greeted them on morning walks. From behind my blind slats, I watched Greg hold court. The deck's encroachment into the wetland area was unmistakable. It extended at least 15 feet beyond where the other property's boundaries ended, cutting into a protected area where red-headed woodpeckers had established nesting sites, birds on Virginia's conservation watch list. Greg's voice carried across the yard, growing louder as the evening progressed and drinks flowed. "Some people just don't understand how communities work," he announced to his captive audience. "They move in and think the rules don't apply to them." Heads turned toward my house. The wood creaked beneath me as I shifted position. "We've maintained standards here for years," Greg continued. "We're not about to let new elements disrupt what we've built." I snapped several photos with my phone, the deck, the crowd, the wetland encroachment. Then I switched to video, capturing 30 seconds of Greg's commentary. The patio heaters glowed orange against the darkening sky, another potential code violation to add to my list. Later that night, I sat at my desk reviewing everything I'd gathered. Greg's violations extended beyond petty harassment into potential tax fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, building code violations, and environmental damage. I opened my contacts list and scrolled to names I hadn't called in months. James Chen at the County Council's office, Maria Vasquez, who headed the Environmental Protection Division, Robert in Code Enforcement, whose wife Mary Ann had been a courtroom clerk for nearly a decade. Greg Thompson had no idea who he was dealing with. He saw a quiet, compliant new neighbor, an easy target for his small-time intimidation racket. He didn't know he'd been poking a federal judge with a lifetime of connections in local government and law enforcement. I wouldn't use my position improperly. That violated every principle I'd upheld on the bench. But I would use my knowledge of how systems worked, how to file complaints that got attention, how to document violations in ways that demanded response, how to build a case that would withstand scrutiny. I picked up my phone and drafted an email to Robert in Code Enforcement, attaching photos of Greg's deck with its obvious wetland encroachment. I kept the language neutral and fact-based, requesting information about permit requirements for structures near protected areas. No mention of my former position. Just a concerned citizen inquiring about proper procedures. As I pressed send, my fingertips tingled with a satisfaction I hadn't felt since retiring. The quiet certainty of setting justice in motion. Greg's reign over Oakwood Estates was about to face its first real challenge, and he didn't even know it was coming. I closed my laptop and filed away the day's evidence. The cheap desk lamp cast shadows across my growing collection of documentation. Patience remained essential, but now it was the patience of a fisherman who's felt the first tug on the line. Greg had built his small kingdom on intimidation and selective enforcement. I would dismantle it using something far more powerful: the actual law. After sending that email to Robert, I spent the weekend transforming my dining room into a war room. Stacks of paper conquered the oak table's surface. Violation notices arranged chronologically. Financial discrepancies highlighted in yellow. Photographs dated and labeled. The wood grain disappeared beneath the weight of evidence I'd methodically assembled. The scratch of my pen against paper filled the quiet house as I organized signed statements from 4 neighbors. Jennifer's handwriting was neat and precise, describing the $500 improvement fee that produced no improvements. Carol's statement, secured after much hesitation, confirmed the same payment and added details about previous collections that had similarly vanished. 2 others, the Andersons from the corner lot, and Michael, the retired accountant, contributed their own accounts of questionable fees collected in cash. By Sunday evening, my fingertips were smudged with ink and paper dust. I'd assembled a 27-page report for the Virginia HOA Oversight Board, each claim backed by evidence, each regulation citation verified. The rhythm of compilation felt familiar, the same methodical approach I'd used to prepare for complex cases throughout my judicial career. Monday morning, I submitted the report electronically, the attached files making my email sluggish to send. I followed up with a hard copy via certified mail, the receipt joining my spreadsheet of official communications. The paper trail was always essential. Another lesson from decades on the bench. With the report submitted, I called the Springfield County Code Enforcement Office. Robert speaking. His voice was crisp, professional. "Good morning, Robert. This is Thomas Bennett. I recently moved to Oakwood Estates on Oakwood Circle." "Yes, Mr. Bennett." Papers rustled on the line. "I received your email about the possible wetland encroachment." I kept my tone conversational as sunlight spilled across my kitchen counter, warming my coffee mug. "I was wondering about the permit process for structures near protected areas. My neighbor's deck appears to extend well into the wetland behind our properties." "The one at 127 Oakwood Circle?" More rustling. "I checked our records after your email. There are no permits on file for that structure." "Is that unusual?" "For a deck that size? Absolutely. County ordinance requires permits for any structure over 200 square feet or extending more than 10 feet from the house." A drawer opened and closed on his end. "I've flagged this for inspection. Would tomorrow morning work for you to be present when I come by?" "I'll be home all day." "Good. Oh, and Mr. Bennett." His voice dropped slightly. "Mary Ann mentioned you might be someone familiar with court procedures." I smiled against the phone. "I may have spent some time in courtrooms." "Thought so. I'll see you tomorrow, sir, around 9. The following morning, I watched from my front window as Robert's white county truck pulled up precisely at 9. A man in his 40s stepped out, clipboard tucked under one arm, measuring wheel in hand. His county uniform hung crisp and official on his frame, badge catching the morning light. I met him at the property line where the dew still clung to grass that was precisely 2.8 inches high, well within regulation. "Robert Davies, County Code Enforcement." His handshake was firm, dry. "Thomas Bennett." "Just doing my job, sir." His eyes flicked toward Greg's house. "Is that the structure in question?" I nodded toward Greg's sprawling deck. Robert unfolded a county property map on my front hood, the paper crinkling as he traced boundaries with his finger. He walked the property line methodically, his measuring wheel clicking with each rotation. At the wetland boundary, he paused, consulting his map again. The smell of damp soil and decaying leaves rose from the protected area, where scattered birdsong punctuated the morning quiet. "This deck extends 17 feet into protected wetland," he said eventually, pencil scratching against his clipboard. "No permits on file, no environmental impact study, no variance request." He looked up, eyebrows raised slightly. "That's 3 separate violations before we even discuss the construction standards." I simply nodded, letting him work. Robert spent nearly an hour documenting the violations. His boots sank slightly into the soft ground near the wetland edge as he inspected the deck's supports. He collected soil samples in small glass vials, each labeled with a black marker. When he spotted the patio heaters still sitting where they'd been during Saturday's gathering, he ran his finger along the manufacturer's plate and frowned. "These heaters commercially rated for outdoor use?" he asked, jotting notes. "I couldn't say." He nodded. "Doesn't appear to be. Residential heaters in a public gathering space. That's another violation." The clipboard's metal clip gleamed as he flipped to a fresh page. "Well, Mr. Bennett, I've seen enough to proceed with enforcement. Multiple violations here. Building without permits, wetland encroachment, unapproved commercial equipment in a residential zone." "What happens next?" I asked, knowing the answer but maintaining my role. "I'll file my report today. The property owner will receive a notice of violation with required corrections and applicable fines." He glanced toward Greg's house, where closed blinds suggested someone watching from within. "And a stop-use order for the deck until it's brought into compliance or removed." "I see. Between you and me, sir, bringing this into compliance would be nearly impossible. The wetland encroachment alone." He shook his head. "That deck will have to come down." I thanked him for his thoroughness. As Robert packed his equipment into his truck, metal measuring tools clinking against each other, Greg's front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the decorative glass insert. He emerged in wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that looked slept in, his terrier circling his ankles. "What the hell is going on here?" Greg's voice cracked across the morning stillness, scattering a pair of cardinals from a nearby bush. Robert straightened, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Robert Davies, County Code Enforcement. I've been conducting an inspection of your deck structure." Greg's steps faltered. The muscles in his neck tightened visibly as his eyes darted from Robert to me, then back. "My deck? What about it?" "We've received a complaint about potential code violations. Unfortunately, I've confirmed several issues that need immediate attention." "What issues? That deck has been there for 3 years?" Spittle gathered at the corner of Greg's mouth. Robert maintained his professional demeanor. "Without permits, sir, and extending into protected wetland. I'll be issuing a stop-use order effective immediately, along with a notice of violation." Greg's face darkened to the color of brick. "This is ridiculous. Who complained? Was it you?" He jabbed a finger at me, close enough that I could smell stale coffee on his breath. I remained silent, letting Robert handle the confrontation. "County policy doesn't allow us to disclose complainants, Mr. Thompson." Robert tucked his clipboard under his arm with a snap. "You'll receive official documentation within 3 business days. Until then, the deck cannot be used for any purpose." Greg's hands balled into fists, knuckles whitening. "This is my property." "And the wetland is county property, sir. The restrictions are clearly outlined in your deed." Robert nodded politely. "Good day, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bennett." The gravel crunched under his boots as he walked back to his truck, climbed in, and drove away. The moment the county vehicle turned the corner, Greg pivoted toward me. His breathing came fast and shallow, fogging slightly in the cool morning air. "You did this," he hissed, the words barely making it through his clenched teeth. I discreetly pressed the voice recorder app on my phone in my pocket. "Did what, Greg?" "Don't play dumb. You've been causing trouble since you moved in. Always watching, taking pictures." Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool temperature. "You think I haven't noticed?" "I've simply been documenting the numerous violations you've issued me," I replied calmly. 17 in my first 3 weeks here. "This is my neighborhood." He stepped closer, his shoe crushing a fallen maple leaf with a dry crackle. "I decide how things run here." "Actually, state law and HOA bylaws determine that." His face contorted, a vein pulsing at his temple. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Bennett. People who cross me tend to regret it." "Is that a threat, Greg?" "It's a promise. You think a deck inspection is the end of this? You've just started a war you can't win." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart rate had quickened slightly. "I'm simply a homeowner ensuring that rules are followed. All rules, not just the ones convenient for certain people." "You'll be sorry," he said, turning away. "Very sorry." I left the recorder running until he'd stormed back into his house, door slamming behind him with enough force to shake loose a dried wreath that clattered to his porch floor. I saved the audio file, emailed it to myself, and added it to my evidence folder. 3 days later, official county letters arrived throughout the neighborhood. The mail truck rumbled away just before noon, leaving white envelopes protruding from mailboxes up and down the street. I pulled mine from the metal box, the county seal embossed in blue at the top corner. The paper was heavy, official, the kind that carries weight beyond its physical presence. The letter announced a mandatory audit of the Oakwood Estates HOA finances and the temporary removal of Greg Thompson as president pending investigation. I knew others had received similar notices because phones began ringing up and down the street. Blinds twitched at windows. A cluster of neighbors gathered at the corner, papers in hand. My doorbell rang less than an hour after mail delivery. The chime echoed through my still sparse living room. I opened it to find Jennifer, letter clutched in her hand, her knuckles white against the paper. "Did you do this?" she asked without preamble, eyes wide. I submitted a complaint to the proper authorities with the evidence I had collected, I replied. The rest is their decision. She shook her head slowly, paper crinkling in her grip. Greg's hosting an emergency meeting tonight. His living room, since the deck is off limits. A small smile played at her lips. You coming? Wouldn't miss it. That evening, I arrived at Greg's house precisely at 7. The living room was already packed with neighbors, bodies squeezed onto plush couches and folding chairs hastily arranged in rows. The air hung thick with tension and too many bodies in too little space. A grandfather clock ticked loudly from the corner, marking each second of Greg's diminishing authority. Greg stood by the stone fireplace, his starched shirt already showing sweat stains under the arms. His face flushed darker when I entered, but he continued speaking, hands gripping the mantel behind him for support. Clearly, a coordinated attack on our community, he was saying, voice pitched higher than usual. Someone has been spreading lies about our HOA management. What about the financial audit? Michael called from his seat near the window, reading glasses perched on his nose. The letter mentions discrepancies in the HOA accounts. Greg waved dismissively, his signet ring catching the light. Paperwork errors, nothing significant. Can we see the records? Jennifer asked from the edge of an overstuffed armchair, her voice stronger than I'd heard it before. They're being organized for the audit, Greg replied quickly, shifting his weight. Michael leaned forward, his chair creaking. But you should have them on hand. Monthly statements going back years. Where are they? Greg's face reddened further, sweat now visible along his hairline. I don't have to justify myself to you people. I've run this HOA for 5 years without anyone questioning me. Maybe that's the problem, Carol said quietly from the corner. Her words barely carried, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard. The grandfather clock's ticking filled the pause. What about the $500 we all paid for the entrance improvements? Jennifer asked, her finger tapping against the arm of the chair. Where did that money go? Greg's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. There were complications. Permits and such. What permits? Michael asked, adjusting his glasses. The letter says you haven't applied for any permits in 3 years. Voices rose around the room. The couple from the end of the cul-de-sac mentioned a special assessment for landscaping that never materialized. A woman in a blue sweater brought up the security upgrade from last year. The air thickened with accusations and questions, the sound bouncing off the vaulted ceiling and wood floors. I sat quietly in a stiff-backed chair near the door, watching the scene unfold. The floorboards creaked beneath shifting feet as neighbors turned to each other, comparing notes and fees. Greg tried repeatedly to regain control of the meeting, his hand smacking against the mantel, but each attempt was met with more questions he couldn't answer. If 15 houses paid $500, that's $7,500 just for the entrance project. Michael calculated aloud, his accountant's precision cutting through the noise. Plus the monthly fees we all pay. Where's all that money, Greg? And what about the $3,000 collected for the holiday lighting last year? Mrs. Davis called out, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor for emphasis. Or the pool fund from 2 summers ago? Mr. Wilson added, his deep voice carrying from the back of the room. Greg's face had progressed from red to purple, veins standing out on his forehead. This meeting is over, he shouted, his voice cracking. Everyone out, now. Not until we get some answers, Jennifer said, standing her ground, arms crossed. I noticed how several neighbors now glanced toward me when asking questions, their eyes seeking confirmation or approval. The room's energy had shifted. Greg stood alone by the fireplace, his authority visibly crumbling with each unanswerable question. The meeting dissolved without resolution, neighbors clustering in hushed conversations as they filed out. Greg stood rigid by his fireplace, watching with barely contained fury as his kingdom unraveled. The grandfather clock continued its steady count, indifferent to the human drama playing out. I was the last to leave. Greg blocked the doorway as I approached, his breathing audible, shoulders squared beneath his damp shirt. "You're finished in this neighborhood," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. His breath smelled of mint mouthwash inadequately masking whiskey. "Actually, Greg, I think I'm just getting started." I stepped around him and walked out into the cool evening air. The next morning, dew still clinging to the grass, I discovered a hand-painted sign staked in my front yard. Red paint dripped from block letters spelling a single word: snitch. I took several photographs from different angles, ensuring the sign's placement on my property was clearly documented. Then I pulled it from the ground, the metal stake coming free with a soft squelch of wet soil. I carried it to my garage, leaned it against the wall beside my growing collection of violation notices, and added the photos to my evidence file. Through the garage window I could see the yellow caution tape now surrounding Greg's illegal deck, plastic strips dancing in the morning breeze. Woodpeckers called from the protected wetland beyond, their rat-a-tat percussion echoing across the neighborhood. I closed the file drawer with a satisfying click. A week passed after finding the snitch sign stabbed into my front lawn. The red paint had dried in uneven drips, testament to Greg's hasty handiwork. I'd documented it thoroughly before storing it in my garage alongside the growing collection of violation notices, physical evidence of a petty tyrant's reign. The emergency HOA meeting notice arrived by certified mail 3 days later. County letterhead, official seals, no sign of Greg Thompson's signature. The location, a Springfield Middle School gymnasium, suggested an authority higher than our neighborhood's self-appointed ruler had taken control. I arrived 20 minutes early, parking where I could observe the gymnasium entrance. October had deepened toward November, and the evening air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. The school's exterior lights cast long shadows across the asphalt as neighbors began to arrive. Something had changed. People walked with straighter backs, their voices carrying across the parking lot without the usual cautious whispers. They gathered in small clusters by the entrance, heads bent together, papers rustling in their hands. No downcast eyes tonight. No hurried steps to avoid conversation. Jennifer pulled her sedan into the space beside mine, brakes squeaking slightly as she stopped. She caught my eye through the window and offered a brief nod, not quite a smile, but something resembling solidarity. "Quite the turnout," I commented as she collected a folder from her back seat. "Everyone wants to see what happens next." She tucked the folder under her arm. "Greg's been calling people all week, trying to build support. Says you're attempting a hostile takeover of the neighborhood." "Interesting theory. Is it true?" She fixed me with a direct gaze. "Are you really trying to take control?" "I have no interest in running the HOA, Jennifer. I just want it run properly." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." We walked together toward the gymnasium entrance. Carol Wilson stood near the water fountain, deep in conversation with Michael. When she spotted me, her conversation faltered momentarily. Then, surprisingly, she raised her hand in greeting. "Thomas," she called, waving us over. "Saved you seats up front." Inside the gymnasium, folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a table where 3 county officials sat reviewing documents. A podium stood to the right, county seal affixed to its front. The basketball hoops were retracted toward the ceiling, and the scoreboard remained dark. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in the same unflattering glow. The hard plastic chair creaked under my weight as I settled in. Michael leaned toward me, his voice low. "About time someone held Greg accountable," he said. "Been trying to get a look at those financial records for 3 years." Greg arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled start, flanked by 2 neighbors I recognized from his deck gatherings. His usual confident stride had shortened to something more cautious. His gaze darted around the room, cataloging faces, tallying potential allies. When his eyes met mine, his expression hardened. He muttered something to his companions and selected seats on the opposite side of the room. At precisely 7 o'clock, the middle official, a gray-haired woman in a navy pantsuit, approached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The feedback whine cut through the murmured conversations, bringing immediate silence. "Yeah, good evening, residents of Oakwood Estates. I'm Commissioner Helen Marks, Chair of the Springfield County Housing Authority. With me tonight are Commissioner Jackson and Director Phillips from County Code Enforcement." She gestured to her colleagues at the table. "This emergency meeting has been called to address serious concerns regarding the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association's financial management and regulatory compliance." The gymnasium's ventilation system clicked on, adding a soft, mechanical undercurrent to her words. Papers rustled as neighbors shifted in their seats. "Following multiple complaints and a subsequent investigation, we have identified numerous violations of Virginia state law regarding HOA governance." Commissioner Marks lifted a document from the podium. "Effective immediately, the current Oakwood Estates HOA board is suspended pending reorganization and election of new leadership." Whispers erupted throughout the room. Jennifer leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder briefly touching mine. Commissioner Marks continued over the murmurs. "Our financial audit has revealed approximately $12,000 in misappropriated funds over the past 3 years." She paused, allowing the information to settle. "As a result, current HOA President Gregory Thompson has been assessed the corresponding fine plus penalties for failure to maintain proper financial records as required by Virginia Code, Section 55.1/1815. Greg shot to his feet. "This is completely unfair. I've managed this HOA for 5 years without a single complaint until he moved in." He jabbed a finger in my direction, his face flushing dark red. "He's been undermining me from day one." Commissioner Marks remained impassive. "Mr. Thompson, you will have an opportunity to speak. For now, please be seated." "You don't understand what he's doing," Greg's voice cracked. "He's manipulating everyone. Ask him who he really is. Go ahead, ask him." The commissioner's gaze shifted to me, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Would you care to address the gathering, Mr. Bennett?" The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of expectation, the collective gaze of people who had been my neighbors for barely 2 months. The hard chair creaked as I rose, my knees stiff from sitting. I straightened my jacket and moved to the podium, shoes squeaking against the polished gymnasium floor. "Thank you, Commissioner." I adjusted the microphone, buying a moment to collect my thoughts. "My name is Thomas Bennett. Until my retirement 3 months ago, I served as a federal judge for the U.S. District Court for Eastern Virginia." The statement landed with physical force. I heard a collective intake of breath, followed by complete silence. Even the ventilation system seemed to pause in recognition of the moment. I moved to Oakwood Estates seeking a quiet retirement. Instead, I found a neighborhood governed by intimidation rather than proper procedure. I kept my tone measured, the same voice I'd used to deliver hundreds of rulings. As a private citizen, I submitted complaints through the appropriate channels, the same channels available to any resident. Greg remained standing, his body rigid, hands clenched at his sides. I continued. "Virginia law establishes clear requirements for homeowners associations: financial transparency, democratic governance, fair enforcement of bylaws. These aren't suggestions. They're legal obligations." I scanned the room, making brief eye contact with various neighbors. I didn't use my former position to influence the investigation. I simply documented violations and submitted them to the proper authorities. The findings are the result of county officials doing their jobs, not any special treatment. Commissioner Marks nodded slightly, her expression professional but approving. "In my years on the bench, I've seen how systems can work properly when people follow established procedures. That's all I've done here. Follow procedures that protect all of us." I stepped back from the podium. "Thank you." I returned to my seat amid silence. No applause, no murmurs, just the weight of revelation settling across the room. Greg remained standing for a moment longer, then sank slowly into his chair, his expression vacant. Commissioner Marks returned to the podium. "Thank you, Judge Bennett." She shuffled her papers, then addressed the room. "The county will oversee your HOA reorganization. Within 30 days, an election will be held for new officers. Until then, essential functions will be managed through my office." The remainder of the meeting passed in an orderly procession of information. The appointment of an interim financial manager, instructions for submitting claims for reimbursement of questionable fees, a timeline for the upcoming election. I listened attentively, making notes in the margin of the agenda. When the formal proceedings concluded, the gymnasium transformed. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged me for weeks approached with extended hands and sheepish expressions. Michael clapped my shoulder with unexpected vigor, nearly causing me to spill the water I'd just poured from a paper cup. "A judge!" he exclaimed. "No wonder you knew all those code sections. I just thought you were a really thorough researcher." Carol approached next, her earlier hesitation replaced with something closer to admiration. "If we'd known—" "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. She considered this, then shook her head. "I suppose not. We were all too afraid of rocking the boat." "Fear is a powerful deterrent to action," I agreed. Jennifer remained by my side as a steady stream of neighbors introduced themselves properly for the first time. Some offered apologies for not standing up sooner. Others asked legal questions I carefully redirected to appropriate county resources. The conversion from pariah to respected figure happened with dizzying speed. As the crowd thinned, Greg approached. The gymnasium had emptied enough that his path toward me drew attention. Conversations quieted. Heads turned to watch. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his aftershave. Something expensive and overpowering. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he found words. "You deliberately concealed who you were." His voice was low, controlled, though the effort it cost him was visible in the tightness around his eyes. "I'm a private citizen now, Greg. My former occupation doesn't require disclosure." "You set me up." "No, Greg. You set yourself up by breaking the rules you claim to enforce." I maintained steady eye contact. Rules exist for everyone, not just those without power to challenge them. His face flushed again, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or the first stage of acceptance. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the half-empty gymnasium. Jennifer watched him go. "What happens now?" "That depends on the neighborhood," I replied. The transformation of Oakwood Estates unfolded gradually over the following weeks. County workers arrived on a Tuesday morning to dismantle Greg's illegal deck, their electric saws whining through the treated lumber. The structure came down plank by plank, each piece loaded into trucks and hauled away. By afternoon, only the concrete footings remained, protruding from the ground like broken teeth. A week later, a "for sale" sign appeared in Greg's front yard. The listing price was ambitious given the property's now exposed condition, but the sign itself represented a victory of sorts, the physical manifestation of accountability. The county-supervised HOA election took place exactly 30 days after the emergency meeting, held in the community room of the local library. Neighbors sat in cushioned chairs arranged in a loose semicircle, the atmosphere noticeably lighter than at any previous gathering. When nominations opened for HOA president, 3 hands shot up simultaneously to nominate me. I politely declined, explaining my preference to remain uninvolved in direct governance while offering occasional legal advice when needed. Jennifer's nomination came next, proposed by Carol and quickly seconded by Michael. She accepted with a brief speech about transparency and community building. The vote was unanimous, her election confirmed by a round of genuine applause. The meeting that followed established new procedures for financial oversight, including quarterly statements accessible to all residents and a requirement for multiple bids on any project exceeding $1,000. Committee assignments were distributed based on expertise rather than loyalty. Questions were answered directly, without deflection or intimidation. As autumn gave way to winter, the neighborhood rhythms shifted. Morning walks included actual conversations rather than rushed greetings. Holiday decorations appeared with creativity rather than rigid conformity. A sense of collective ownership emerged, not just of property, but of community standards and governance. Greg's house sold in late January to a young family with 2 small children. They painted the door a cheerful yellow that would have triggered multiple violations under the previous regime. Instead, neighbors brought welcome baskets and invitations to the monthly potluck Jennifer had instituted. By spring, I rarely thought about the snitch sign that still leaned against my garage wall, a relic from a neighborhood that no longer existed. The peace I'd sought in retirement had finally materialized, not through avoidance of conflict but through its proper resolution. One April evening, as I sat on my back porch with a glass of scotch, the same activity I'd enjoyed on my first night in the house, Jennifer stopped by with a question about easement regulations for a proposed community garden. As we discussed the legal considerations, woodpeckers called from the protected wetland behind our properties. The sound carried clearly now that the illegal deck no longer blocked their habitat. "You know," Jennifer said, leaning against the porch railing, "you could have just moved somewhere else when Greg started harassing you. Most people would have." I considered this, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Running from injustice rarely solves it. Still, it would have been easier. Easier isn't always better. I took a sip of scotch, appreciating its warmth. Sometimes the hard path leads exactly where you need to go. Jennifer nodded and gathered her papers. As she left, she paused at the steps. The neighborhood meeting next Thursday. Nothing formal, just a chance for everyone to meet the new families who moved in this month. "I'll be there," I promised. After she departed, I remained on the porch until twilight faded to darkness. The evening air carried the scent of newly mowed grass and distant charcoal grills. From somewhere down the street came the sound of children playing, their laughter carrying across properties without regard for boundary lines or HOA regulations. This was the retirement I had envisioned, a community built on mutual respect rather than fear, where rules served the common good instead of individual power. I had shown in my small way that sometimes justice works exactly as it should. I finished my scotch and went inside, leaving the porch light on for another 10 minutes, well within the reasonable hours permitted by our revised HOA guidelines.